culture with worldviews which once would have been considered inconceivable but are now considered honorable, a small voice cries out in the wilderness. A voice which is unwilling to surrender to the demands or the madness of the woke culture. This voice may be small, and yet it holds great power. Power that cannot be weighed on the scales of a godless culture, but power that will nonetheless stand the test of time, because it is the truth. Welcome, pilgrims, to the Pugnacious Pilgrim Podcast. We are glad you are here with us today, and we are hopeful that you will walk away informed, enriched, and equipped to live as pilgrims in a brave new world.
Mike, how we doing, my man?
Doing well. Every week, my mustache gets in the whiskey more and more and more. I refuse to trim it, but
Why would you? I mean, they don't call it a flavor saver for any other reason. I mean, it's a flavor saver, right?
That's right, and it does save the flavor.
And I like the saved flavor.
It savors the flavor.
Flavor saver. Well, I mean, you're getting stoked. You're getting ready. The beard obviously is going to come in handy pretty much for the month of November. This wasn't a no shave November deal, right?
I stopped shaving well before November.
Well, you can't tell. I mean, wait,
it's been a couple of days.
But you're in preparation to go. I mean, you were saving the ducks in the month of October.
Yes.
What exactly are you doing in the month of November?
Probably saving the deer. Making sure nobody shoots them.
Yeah.
I mean, unless I see one.
Right. And that's good. I mean, I think it's been how many years since you got a deer? Do you think?
I don't know why you had to bring that up, but it's been, 3 or 4.
I bring it up because there's excitement there, right? You want to go get the deer. You're on a cold streak. There's nothing.
A little bit, yeah.
I mean, it is what it is. I've never got a deer. I hit a deer with my car one time.
I hit a deer with my truck last year.
Did you?
Yep.
He made it?
I don't know. It was a female, though.
Okay.
I wouldn't hit a male deer with my truck. I mean, come on.
So my only experience hitting a deer actually was the deer hitting me. So I was in a $300 car that I had. The back bumper was actually being held up by a phone wire, like the RJ11 or whatever it is. It was actually being held up by that.
Very cool.
And I was flying down 17, which is a road here in Shakopee, and probably speeding a little bit, but not too bad. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like this deer comes like straight at me from the left on the driver's side and just smashes. I mean, I slammed on my brakes because I saw it, and I skidded, and boom, it hit me.
Oh, man.
And then took off running in another direction.
That's maybe like the 3rd or 4th time I've heard a story of somebody talking about a deer running into them.
Yeah.
So it happens more often than I think people realize.
This was a buck.
Was it?
The problem for me was that right next to me, when I was slamming on my brakes, was a cop that was pulled over on the side of the road, having just probably pulled somebody over. And so I quickly pull kind of in front of him because I want to assess the damage to my $300 car that had a bumper holding up by a phone wire.
Sure.
And the cop gets out of his car, and he's like, "What are you doing?" I mean, he was like screaming at me. And I'm like, "I'm sorry, man. I just got hit by a deer." And he's like, "Dude, you scared the crap out of me." Because he was like filling out his like post report info, and he just said, just hearing the brakes made him think I was gonna slam into him.
Did he know you were white? There's no threat.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure what to do with that one, so I'm just gonna leave it be.
I'm sorry.
But in reality, it was pretty cool because he took his flashlight. My biggest concern wasn't my car because, like I said, it was a piece of junk car that the bumper was being held up by RJ11 phone wire. But he took his flashlight because I wanted to make sure that we weren't gonna like have to put a deer out of its misery.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I was actually preaching at church that Sunday because our pastor was out hunting deer.
Oh, nice.
And so the running joke the next day was, the pastor didn't get a deer, but I did driving home last night. So, but anyway, it's deer hunting season, man.
It
so
sure is.
I guess for those listeners, pilgrims that are listening that maybe aren't part of PETA or vegans or something like that, just be praying for Mike that he actually gets a deer this year.
Yeah, I'm hoping I get a deer. when we get sick of sitting around, me and my buddy Tyler, we're going to walk around the woods, one guy holding a shotgun, one guy holding a rifle, so we can swap back and forth going for deer or grouse. So hopefully we'll get some type of meat to bring
There you
home.
go.
Either way, it's going to be a good time. I mean, it's always fun to be able to sit out in the woods. So
Yeah. Well, we want to welcome our pilgrims to the podcast. So if you're joining us, thank you for doing that. We would also encourage you, if you're not already, to jump on the chat lines. We have some new cameras because Mike wanted the opportunity to pick his nose.
Whoa.
Or to do things, that weren't going to be on camera. That's what we got going on here. So if you see us switching through our channels, that's what it's about. But welcome, pilgrims, to the podcast. Jump on the chat lines with you. We wanna interact with you. We got one listener chiming in, my nephew, saying that he's sick once again. He's got what we call the curse of the Boston cold, and so that.
it's been too long since I've seen JJ.
Yeah, get well, buddy, so you can come here. He's usually like in the house while we stream live.
Yeah.
So we miss his presence, and get well, JJ, because we want to hang out again. But
For sure.
we got a cool show lined up, Mike. Why don't you tell our listeners what we're gonna be kind of what's the theme of tonight's show?
You told me, but I was distracted when you were telling me. What is it again?
It's the lost art of listening.
Oh,
Mike.
that's
Yeah,
right.
Of all the things for you to no, I appreciate that. You were playing along, and that's good. I appreciate that. But yeah, that's what we're going to be discussing today, the lost art of listening. And, really just to kind of set the tone of what we're trying to kind of dive into is we live in a culture, a climate right now, Mike, where everyone is spending a lot of time talking past one another, not really listening to one another. And I think, we obviously know that there are plenty of wedges being driven between people. And, we just kind of want to get to the bottom of that. And then as Christians, how can we live differently, maybe through the lens of the gospel, to ensure that we are being good listeners, even when we disagree. And so I'm looking forward to that, and maybe to set the tone of that a little bit. Have you paid any attention, Mike, to kind of some of the politics that have played out? I guess you did. I was with you when you participated in some local election stuff.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because you texted me, you're like, "Are you going to vote today?" And I was like, for what? And then, I went online and saw some of the discussions, and I did know what we were voting for. I just kind of forgot that it was like that day we were supposed to. But essentially, we had a little victory, but it's a victory nonetheless. Our school district was trying to vote for a technology levy that was going to increase the technology spending by, what was it, like $35 million?
Yeah, over 10 years.
And the people in our school district voted against that. And there are a lot of people that are upset about that. There are a lot of people that are really happy about that. Clearly, the majority won, right?
Yeah.
So, good, bad, or indifferent, that's what the people wanted.
Right.
So, I've been involved in a few discussions since then about why somebody would want to vote against that. And it seems like people don't understand that it has nothing to do with us hating children.
Imagine that.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with us hating children.
Or even your love for Donald Trump, for that matter, right?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. Still think he's way better than Joe Biden, but I'm not just like a fan of Donald. I'm not a fanatic, right?
Yeah.
But it has everything to do with our distrust of the public school system, who have demonstrated over and over and over again that the more money we give them, the worse they spend it. You know what I mean? And then they come back and they ask for more, and they're like, "Hey, we're falling behind. And it's like, well, you have so much money. Why do you guys think you can just throw money at stuff? Technology is not going to be what pulls kids in and gives them a
Right.
good education. That's never been what it is in the past.
Yeah, and I think, to be honest, at least for me, my perspective is very similar. The issue that I had is that, this is a lot of money, right? It's 30,
Yeah.
like you said, $35 million, basically 3.5 million that was being passed for the next 10 years. And inflation, who knows what that's going to bring that amount to, in that 10-year time period.
Right.
But like you, it's like, hey, we just passed a referendum a couple years ago, gave us some new school facilities, but a lot of people were frustrated because, like you said, the mismanagement of funds, which is what people were concerned about.
Yes.
Is still keeping classroom sizes at like 30 to 40 students per teacher, and they're wondering, is it not possible to maybe put together a referendum that would allow us to get more teachers into the new buildings that we have? We have plenty of space.
Right.
Why do the classroom sizes need to be as big as they are? And
I would say that, like, if this levy was to increase the amount of teachers or something like that,
Right.
I think a lot of people probably would have voted for that, because a lot of the backlash coming from people who voted yes for this tech levy, they're like, we have great teachers. And it's like, yeah, but that's not an argument. You're trying to increase technology so that the
Right.
teachers don't have to do as much. We need more teachers. Well, we need more good teachers. In my experience, kids, when I was a kid, right, and when I switched to a learning environment where it was like 10 kids to a teacher, everybody excelled.
Yeah.
And you've probably seen that within the context of homeschooling as well.
For
so.
sure. Yeah. I think, because Anna, my wife, and Sue Ellen, who teaches with her, are able to kind of invest into a smaller group of kids, they can not only understand who's learning and who's having difficulties, but can invest into them in ways that are pretty unique. And obviously, the bigger your classroom sizes are, the harder it is to do that. And certainly, the issue, the other issue that I had personally with this fund, with this money, is that, obviously there's been a lot of steam about critical race theory and inclusion and diversity and equity, kind of entering into the material that is being taught to our kids, and safe spaces and things like that. The issue, at least for me personally, is that, the funds that we set aside not too many years ago when the initial referendum passed, a lot of those were used to, pay for some of these things that as a parent, I'm personally not excited about. Now, my kids don't go to public school, but that doesn't mean that I don't have an opinion on what's being taught in the public school, arena.
For sure.
And they also, at least in our district, they brought in a specialist to kind of deal with intersectionality and some of these other, buzzword things, even though.
And we don't have any money.
Yeah.
But how much are you paying this person?
Well, in this case, it was $150K a year. So, I mean, again, I think teachers deserve to get paid, but do we really need a specialist that deals with inclusion and equity and intersectionality in our public school system? My personal opinion is no. And because that's how I see you choosing to spend this money, what would make me believe that other things like that wouldn't be getting purchased as well? We had one of our listeners, Sarah Copley, how's it going? She told us she was going to check in, but she said, the same thing was going on with the Shakopee levy, and I'm not sure if that one passed or not.
I heard that it did pass.
It did? So
that's what I
Shakopee's
heard.
did. Okay.
I don't know. Maybe, Sarah, you can hold us accountable to that one, but there was some back and forth in the Citizens of Prior Lake group that was like, well, Shakopee passed it, so we're going to get passed by Shakopee. It's like, how many of us in Prior Lake are like worried about what goes on in Shakopee? Most of us don't even want anything to do with it. It's like,
well, I have roots in both towns, but again, like any way you slice it, we're raising up the next generation of kids. And for me personally, I work in technology. I know the good that comes from technology. I certainly believe that when it comes to the sciences and the math and kids having a proper understanding of technology, I think that's a good thing, because that's the world in which we live. The issue that I have is, like, I just read an article yesterday that said, kids are already spending 8 hours a day on average in front of screens. And so I don't want to introduce more screen time for our kids. I personally would love if they were having less than that, because I think there is an impact on their brain development and other things, with screen time.
I'll tell you, as So I'm probably part of the last generation that ever experienced childhood without internet. Um, I I remember when dial-up like became a thing, and we had to like wait a half an hour for the computer to turn on. Then we had to wait another 20 minutes just for the internet to connect, and then you'd have to stop and wait another 10 minutes for your web page to load. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah.
So like we went outside, but my life dramatically changed with access to the internet. My screen time went up. My when I turned 15, I like stopped going outside. And then it was like when I was 20, I was like, man, cuz I grew up with a lake in my backyard, and I wasted like 5 years just unable to appreciate it because I was inside on the internet the whole time. And now as an adult, I'm like addicted to it,
Mhm.
and I see the damage that it does in my life. So I wake up every day and I'm convicted, and I'm like, I can't spend time on the internet. But it's like then I have to log into work.
Yeah.
Before I know it, I'm like watching YouTube videos,
Sure.
and I just almost on a daily basis, I wonder how much my life would improve if I was just able to kick the habit. And I'm upset that I even let it get to this
Sure.
point. So we have an
well-
opportunity with our children to not let it get to that point.
Yeah, and it's actually pretty easy to let it get to that point. To your point, even involuntarily, really. I mean, and I know it's a choice, but sometimes it's subconscious. Like I'll come downstairs and I do my quiet time right here in my office, but I also office down here. So, if I turn on my computer to look at commentaries or anything like that, the initial distraction, is right there to try
Yeah.
to pull me into something that's work related or whatever else, right? When I'm really trying to carve out time with the Lord. And so, distractions, as we've talked about, are not always good. And I believe that technology can be used for good, but it's very easy for us as Christians and my wife and myself to evaluate, like, there's so much negative things attached with and associated to technology that even for us, it's like, man, is this really a blessing for us at all?
Right.
And I love the fact that, my son, he's homeschooled and he uses his computer to do his math, and it's really great. But at the same time, I feel like we're in a constant battle to try and pull back some of the technology that is just so rampant in our life. So,
Yeah.
I'm not sad in that regard. I think a lot of people on the local level here were like, hey, if you can be transparent with a budget and because that was one of the things.
Yeah,
too,
there's
is
a
like-
big audit. Well, there's a petition going
Right.
around for an audit of the spending.
Yeah.
So, and like it's so weird to me. It's kind of like the whole election thing, right? When people are like, we want audits, and people are like, you're crazy. Like, you're a conspiracy theorist. It's like, who in their right mind would say that we shouldn't look into this a little bit further?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's
even
a
if-
lot of money.
Yeah. Even if you're like on the side of the school district, like getting more money, like when is auditing that a bad thing? When is auditing the spending of taxpayers' money ever a bad thing? We should be the ones holding them accountable. They should be completely transparent
Right.
because it's our money that they're spending. We have
Exactly.
every right to be concerned about this.
Right. And I think, it's natural probably to get a little bit defensive, like, hey, what are you trying to say? We're just trying to do our job. And
Yeah.
I appreciate that. In fact, I think most people probably believe that, but they just want to understand, where is this money going to go? And, and it sounds like Sarah chimed in and said that their levy did pass in Shakopee. So they're
Yep.
going to be dealing with a whole nother set of circumstances and issues. But, once that money's granted, right, that's coming right out of the taxpayers' pockets, right? And this is a tough time to tell people, especially those that are on fixed incomes, that now somehow they're going to be responsible for an additional $3.5 million a year when the price of groceries is going up, when the price
Yeah.
of gas is going up, when the price of natural gas is going up. So it's just like, the timing probably couldn't have been any worse than
Yeah.
it was. But at the same time, people did ask, like, hey, what is this money going to go for? Like, show us what technology.
Yeah.
You give it under this umbrella of technology. You say, if you care for kids, this is what you do. You take taxpayers'
Oh, yeah.
money to fund the whole campaign that is telling people to vote yes. You're already taking our money to try and pitch why you need more money. And, people were just fed up. And to be honest, I'm happy. I'm really happy that it didn't pass.
Yeah, same here. It's kind of goofy because it seems like people who, and I shouldn't say all people, but there is probably a higher risk of this attitude developing among people who get their paychecks from taxpayer money. It's almost like a kid who didn't pay for his school, right? He will treat school completely differently than the kid who had to pay his way through school, right?
Sure.
And I see a lot of government officials, I see school districts, I see all kinds of people basically just throwing money around because they didn't have to earn it. It just comes in, right?
Right.
I work hard and they get paid. I'm not trying to say that teachers don't work hard because I do believe that they work hard. As a matter of fact, I have some teachers that are very close to me, and during the school year, they work harder than I ever want to work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, it's like from when they wake up to when they go to bed a lot of the times. And I believe that the teachers should get paid more,
Yeah.
just for the
Right.
record.
That's not the problem.
Yeah, I
here.
think it's like the bureaucrats and the people that are kind of in like middle government positions that just collect huge paychecks and make stupid financial decisions. And then they try to get mad when you're like, why did you spend $8,000 on a conference room table? And they're like, you just hate children, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Why do you hate kids so much? Well, and that's what's funny is that you look at, other places throughout the United States. I think Colorado, they, when they were levying to get marijuana legalized, right? Like they right out of the gate, they attached that tax to right to education in the state because they were smart about it, right? They're like, dude, no one in their right mind is going to take this away from us once it's passed because they're taking money away from kids.
Yeah, manipulation is really smart.
It works. I don't know if it's smart. I definitely don't think it's wise. But
I think
it
you have
certainly
to
does
be
work.
intelligent in order to be a successful manipulator, but that does not mean it's a good thing to do.
Right.
So
There's definitely a difference between wisdom and intelligence in that regard. But really, why are we talking about this? Because we saw the fallout, right? And I'm sure that our listeners did too, especially Sarah and her husband Joe, who were obviously dealing with this in Shakopee. But even the aftermath, right? Like it. What's weird about this is that it does become overly political, right? Like to me, of course, politics was involved to a certain degree, but that's not primarily what this tech levy was about, right? It was not supposed to be political, but somehow it became this Donald Trump, Joe Biden.
Yeah, and that's the
MAGA
dumbest
versus,
thing.
And I guess that's kind of when I thought about that and when I saw that, and of course this isn't the first time we see it, right? But it's just more evidence that we're really not paying attention, right? We don't really have our pulse on the truth. We have our pulse on just our perception of, what side are you on, and
right.
It just all becomes crazy.
Yeah, it does. I saw a funny post the other day on Facebook that somebody was like, so we have two narratives right now regarding the public school system, and one narrative is that it's crumbling and falling apart and it needs more money, and the other narrative is please don't pull your kids out of public school.
Well, and they're actually coming, aren't they? Yeah, I mean, the same people that are telling us that, they need more money because, the schools aren't working are also now telling us that, don't take your kids out of the school,
Yeah, our public school system is horrible and we need more money, but also you can't solve this problem by yourself. You need us. You need us. We're failing, but you need us, remember? And yeah, I think people are just starting to kind of see through that.
Which actually is a good thing. The encouragement that I think we have is that, when I look at maybe more on the national level, which is kind of where we want to take this next, it's not really national, but it's tied to national politics. There was another gubernatorial race in Virginia that actually was a lot closer than Democrats expected it to be. And Republican Glenn Youngkin
in the still of the night.
Yeah, exactly. There wasn't a massive dump of votes that came in while everyone was sleeping, but Republican Glenn Youngkin defeated Terry, the incumbent governor, and the reaction to it was like, it's exactly what I expected.
Dude, it's so nuts. They're like America's falling apart.
Well, it's
Virginia elected a Republican governor. The whole country's falling apart.
Well, to me, like, if that's how you feel, so be it, right? Because obviously, I think there was a lot of people once Donald Trump was not reelected that felt very similar, right? And the proof is in the pudding, however you want to say it. But there was an angle that I just honestly could not believe, even though I expected it to come. I did not expect them to play the card the way they did. The response that I saw here that night, first of all, was it Van Jones? I think I sent it to you, where he said, Youngkin is basically the Delta version of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And he tried to equate, Trump being a disease, and that Youngkin was the Delta version of that disease. And then there was an article right away on Wednesday morning from MSNBC that said Glenn Youngkin's victory proves white ignorance is a powerful weapon. And the subheading is Virginia's new Republican governor won his race by stoking outrage over critical race theory. And I want to read a little bit. This is by Jahan Jones, again, MSNBC. It says Republican Glenn Youngkin has defeated the Democratic incumbent in Virginia's closely watched gubernatorial race, NBC News projected early on Wednesday morning. Youngkin, who received Donald Trump's endorsement in May, led a largely ill-defined campaign, often hewing close to the former president's 2020 election lies, while also trying to distance himself from them. Similar to Trump, Youngkin is a businessman with no political experience whose campaign focused on hot-button social topics like outrage over school curricula, rather than substantive policy discussions. From the outset, it was clear that Youngkin would need fervent support from the state's conservative base, along with the backing of some white voters in Democratic-leaning areas like Loudoun County to win the race. Ultimately, his campaign settled on a game plan that seemed to resonate deeply with white voters in Virginia, targeting school lesson plans that address inequality and social justice. Youngkin adopted the conservative strategy of falsely grouping these lesson plans under the label of critical race theory, and he promised to ban such teachings on day one if elected. Critical race theory is a college-level field of study that's not taught in Virginia K-12 schools, but it's become a catch-all phrase for intellectually lazy people, many of them white, who want to stigmatize any discussion about American racism.
Dude, how racist was that? I mean, seriously, like they paint all white people as if they're idiots, like just ignorant morons.
They use the word ignorant.
And then they throw their hands up and they go, how could this have happened? Well, the only way it could have happened is if everybody was ignorant. It's like, maybe you're the ignorant one. Like we keep electing people that don't have a history in politics. Why? Is it because we're all idiots and we're all ignorant and we're all redneck losers? Like we're not morons. We know what we're doing and we're doing it on purpose. And it has nothing to do with the color of our skin. They want to make it about the color of our skin, and we just see through it. It's not out of our own ignorance. And it ties in perfectly to the theme of our message. They're not listening.
Right.
And they're not listening to the heart of America.
No.
Like middle America is upset and they're going, well, middle America just must be stupid. Oh, and they're all white. So they all must be stupid because they're white or whatever.
Right.
Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions there, but it certainly seems like that,
Well, and I'm trying to paint a real picture of some of the reaction from the progressive left, but Jemele Hill, who used to be on ESPN but got kicked off because really around a lot of the Colin Kaepernick stuff, and she began to turn everything into racist, racism, race baiting. But she said it's not the messaging, folks. This country simply loves white supremacy, and that didn't age well because actually the Florida's lieutenant governor replied to her on Twitter with a picture of the governor of Virginia in blackface,
right? Standing next to a guy dressed as
in the KKK uniform, and then next to that picture was a picture of the lieutenant governor that Virginia literally just elected that same night as Youngkin, who happens to be a black conservative. And she said, alongside that picture, she said, which one is the VA Democrat governor, and which one is the Republican who won an election in Virginia last night?
Right.
That's kind of the point, right? Like you can, like to your point, if you're not listening, you can make up whatever narrative you want, right? Like it doesn't have to be rooted in truth. It doesn't have to be based in reality. It literally just has to be, whatever you want. Like your feelings can drive it, right? So obviously this gal has a lot of feelings about racism in America and how far we've come and how far we haven't come or how far we have yet to go. But what seems to be the reality is, yes, parents did respond to critical race theory, and it has many other names, right? And we've talked about that plenty on the show. That, diversity, inclusion, equity, all of these kind of subject matters. Even when you're creating safe spaces and giving segregating areas based on skin color, like all those things are very racist, and it's not who America is, and it's not who America wants to be.
It's not bringing people of different races closer to one another. Essentially what it's doing is it's just kind of guilt tripping white kids into thinking that they have something like inherently wrong with them. And you and I talked about this article, Jason. It was the one that was like critical race theory doesn't go far enough or something like that. And really the whole point of the article was like they're almost there.
Right.
When they're talking about like having something that's inherently wrong about you.
Yep.
Where they get it wrong is that it has nothing to do with your skin color. They should be talking about sin.
Right.
And it's not exclusive to any race.
Yeah.
They're almost there.
Yeah.
They're turning this stupid racist debate into a religion and refusing to call it a religion, and then they're giving it all these different kinds of names and then calling everybody stupid that apparently just doesn't understand. It's like, it's not out of a lack of sophistication that we're calling this stuff out. It's out of an abundance of education and research and calling it out and saying we think this is stupid and you think we're stupid. So I guess we're just both calling each other stupid.
Well, and in some ways, right? Like, people are going to vote where their morals are, right?
Yeah.
And there are enough people who are concerned about, a lot of people can look at, certain circumstances in the world and just say, look, that's wrong, right? And no one's ignorant enough to say that racism doesn't exist, right? The problem is that certain racism exists and is okay because it's there's no such thing as reverse racism, right? You can't punch, what's the verbiage? You can't punch up. You can only,
you can't punch down.
You can't punch down.
You can only punch up.
You can punch up.
Yeah.
So, the writing's on the wall, right? Like this is a deception. It's a scheme. It's really rooted in, Marxism, which we've talked about on this show before. And America doesn't want it. We don't want it in our country. We don't want it in our culture. And we understand that if it's allowed to breed, that it doesn't bring unity. It doesn't bring people together. It does the exact opposite, right? And that doesn't mean that we don't want to talk about racism. And we've talked about this on the show already, but when we grew up, Mike, obviously we're a decade plus apart from each other, but I learned about racism in school. I learned about slavery. I learned about Jim Crow. I learned about all that. And it wasn't whitewashed in a way that was trying to paint it as, it wasn't that big of a deal. No, it was talked about in reality. This was wrong.
Right.
And this is how we moved away from that, right? We abolished slavery. We had a civil rights movement that gave black men and women and even children the ability to live among their culture as full human beings, participating in any ways that they desired, right?
Yeah.
But that's not sufficient, right? Especially for those who are financially tied to ensuring that they get they keep perpetuating that whatever you want to call it, ideology or whatever it is.
Yeah, I agree. My school was a little bit different just because, I went to the public school here in Briar Lake for the first 10 years of my schooling, and then I switched to a very, very progressive, like, creative arts type high school. And at that creative arts high school, it was, there was definitely a narrative. And this was back when I was like pretty liberal. I did not believe in God. And, I didn't see anything wrong with that. I just thought that the other kids that like weren't into that were just evil,
Yeah.
and it was all as kind of like a result of being brainwashed by the school.
Sure.
But, I don't know. Like where I am today is I think it's cringy when the left calls the right racist, and I also think it's cringy when the right is like, look, we just elected a black person, we're not racist.
yeah.
Like, it's cringy on both sides, you know? Like, why do we even have to be talking about this stuff anymore? It just frustrates me to no end.
Well, and actually, that's a great segue into where we want to go next, which actually is a clip from the lieutenant governor that was elected in Virginia. Her story's pretty cool. I'll let her tell it herself. But basically, what she said is we can do better, and that's her invitation to America, is to be better, to do better. So let's play that, and then we'll talk about it a little bit on the backside.
I was still a Jamaican, but this country had done so much for me. I was willing to die for this country. USA!
Republican Winsome Sears delivering an emotional, inspirational speech as voters in Virginia elected her to become the lieutenant governor. No, sir, indeed. So, obviously there's a lot of talk. You heard perhaps in the tease before our segment that you are the first woman of color, lieutenant governor of Virginia. And I thought it was very interesting last night when you just said, I'm black. If you haven't noticed, I think were your words. And then you said, but it's not about that. What did you mean by that?
Because we are framing too many issues in terms of race, and it just continues to divide us. And unfortunately, politicians are using it as a tool because of the things that have happened to us historically to advance, I would think, their nefarious purposes. And so if we stop just looking at race and just looking at people, because you see, I'm destroying all the narratives about race. Look at me. Look at me. I am a heartbeat away from the governorship in case anything happens to the governor. And how are you going to tell me then I'm a victim? And I didn't do anything special to get here except stay in school and study. I took advantage of the opportunities that are available here in America. I wasn't born here. This is not my culture, not my country, but it allowed me, America allowed me to come and do for myself and for my family. And I remember when I was wanting to go to college, I had 3 children under 5. My husband took a lower paying job so he could stay home because he already had his degree. And I put one of my children on the back of a bicycle so that I could get to college. So no one can say to me, I don't know what it is to be poor. You're looking at the American dream. So we can do better. And it's not 1963 when my father came at the height of the civil rights movement, 17 days before Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. We're better than that.
We're better than that, are we not?
Well, it would certainly seem so. Yeah, it is frustrating to me when the left has created a narrative that's untrue, and a lot of people are frustrated about like this narrative that doesn't even exist. That seems silly to me. But at the same time, like, I think it's weird that she was like, I didn't do anything special to get to this position. It's like, well, I don't think we should teach our kids that they don't have to do anything special. I mean, you certainly do have to do special things to be able to occupy a position like that. So I think she might be playing into the race debate a little bit by saying that. But she does certainly make a good point that, like, you can't tell me America's racist. You can't tell me that America's, like, anti-black. I mean, look what just happened, right? So I think that it's a good point that she's making.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the way that and you're probably right? I think, like, no, everyone's biased to some certain degree, right?
Yeah.
But, kind of what I heard her say in that I didn't have to do anything special is that, nothing was handed to her, or she didn't have some hidden way of getting to where she was. She just worked hard, right? Like,
yeah,
she wasn't raised in a place that was exempt from poverty. Like, she was raised in that, and yet she still found a path using the American dream to get to where she is today, and she's grateful for it, and she loves her country for it, right? And so in some ways, like, I think, maybe trying to pull us back to, like, where we're trying to go tonight, right, is this idea that unless we're willing to listen to one another, unless we're really trying to hear people out, we're going to continue to just perpetuate myths, misinformation, mistruths, right? And we don't get anywhere, right? And certainly I'm not trying to give progressives a pathway towards victory. Like I want progressivism to fail, because I don't think it honors Jesus. I don't think it honors people. I don't think it honors the foundation of the United States of America.
Right.
But at the same time, it's like, look, if they would just look at how America is responding to the things that they are pushing most on, they'd probably be in a better place.
Yeah,
like,
they have to stop jumping to conclusions.
Well, and not just that, but literally what we're seeing now is doubling down. I read something, basically that was saying that progressives think they have to move further left in order to be victorious. And yet today, I'm probably going to say his name wrong, but is it Manchin or whatever? He's like, he's the Democrat that's like finding himself now like siding with the GOP on Biden's
Not
big
familiar
tax
with him.
bill or whatever. But basically what he said just today is that America is moderate right.
Yeah.
That's what he believes. Like holistically, the majority of people are moderate right.
Yeah, I mean, even like some people really close to me that didn't really like Trump at all, when they sat down and they looked at his policies or like his proposals and stuff like that next to Biden's, they agreed with Trump on everything and still wouldn't vote for the guy on like the principle and not liking him.
Right, which I actually it's hard for me to argue, right? Because I mean, we've talked about it before. I mean, we're not Trumpies on this show, right? Like we understand and acknowledge fully.
And that's what I'm saying about jumping to conclusions, is because I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people that like I will be defending certain principles and ideals, and they'll be like, "Oh, you're just a Trump tard," and I'm like, "I didn't vote for the guy this last election."
Right.
Like how can you just jump straight to that conclusion and already paint a picture of me and you hate me because you've associated me with somebody I'm not even a fan of?
Right.
Like you're not listening.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly where we find ourselves right now is a culture and a climate, where really politics is probably playing way too big of a role in general.
Yeah.
And because of that, we're really not listening to one another. We're trying to hear maybe where people are coming from so that we can, put them into the box we think they belong in most. But in reality, we're not listening. And so
that's lazy thinking.
It is lazy thinking.
Yeah.
We're going to take a short commercial break here, Mike. And when we come back, we're going to dive into this topic. Look at it from a Christian point of view. How do Christians change? How do we grow? How do we get the art of listening, the lost art of listening back and live into that as Christians? So don't go anywhere, Pilgrims. We look forward to having the rest of the conversation with you when we get back. Pugnacious Pilgrim. Hello, friends. My name is Jason, and I'm one of the co-hosts of the Pugnacious Pilgrim podcast. Do you find it difficult to determine truth from error, good from evil, or fact from fiction in a world where moral lines seem to be constantly shifting? We get it. We're living in some crazy times, and sometimes that makes it difficult to know exactly how a Christian is supposed to be faithful to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And that's why we're here. We started this podcast with the purpose of taking a look at the world from a Christian's point of view. We fully acknowledge that a Christian worldview will not be popular by today's standards, but that doesn't make it any less important or necessary. Our hope is to have conversations that are rooted in culturally relevant topics, but to do so while also allowing God's Word to be our guide and to have the final say. So if you feel alone, like a pilgrim in a strange land, and want to spend some time listening, learning, and participating in a conversation that will help you live boldly into the power of the Holy Spirit, then we invite you to join us every week for the Pugnacious Pilgrim podcast. Mike and I won't pretend to have all the answers, but what we do promise is to do our best at discerning truth from error and having some fun along the way. So if you're looking for something different than what you've already found so far, we encourage you to give us a try. And if you like what you hear, do us a favor, tell your friends. For more information about the Pugnacious Pilgrim, check out our website at www.pugnacioupilgrim.com. Thanks again, Pilgrims. Stay pugnacious. Well, welcome back, Pilgrims. We're certainly thankful and grateful to have you here. that's a commercial about ourselves. That's pretty much the only commercials that we play, at least thus far, because we don't have any sponsors for the podcast. But we'd love some. But speaking of that, Mike, you changed, dude. Tell us what you're wearing. What shirt is this?
I am wearing a shirt.
I do see that.
Let me get this better. All right. Well, it says God is judgmental on it, and I'm sure that that's going to raise some eyebrows, maybe get some fists shaking, and maybe it's don't grab your pitchforks and light your torches just yet. Really, this shirt is to spark a conversation, and on the back it's got our logo. I've had too many conversations in the last year about God's judgment, and people truly believe that God isn't going to judge us. And that is of utmost concern to me. And I'm not talking about people who don't believe in God saying this. I'm talking about people who profess to be Christians saying that they don't believe that God is judgmental, that they don't believe that God is going to rightly judge us. And he will.
Yeah.
He will, right? I mean, certainly Jesus came to pay the price for our sins, but we also have a responsibility to repent. And if we don't repent and turn towards Christ, what is going to happen?
Well, we go to hell, right? I mean, that's God's judgment, and he's
Yeah.
told us, right? The wrath of God remains on us.
Kind of one of the central messages, right? So we thought about putting a Bible verse on here, but we are going to put that on you pilgrims to
Yeah.
be able to educate yourselves in Scripture so that you can hold your own in conversations with people if you would like to purchase one of these shirts and wear it while you are out and about, because I am sure that you'd get a few comments here and there. So.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the point, right? I mean, the shirt is intentionally provocative. We are calling you to be pugnacious. That's all done in a heart that is humble. That's all done in a heart that desires to engage people with the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so if you would like to purchase one of these shirts, you can, and you can find it at our website, www.pugnacioupilgrim.com. And you'll also see that there's coffee cups and stickers and sweatshirts and some other material as well. Some of the proceeds for that go directly to supporting this show. A large percent of it just literally goes to cover the cost of the merchandise. So
Yeah.
we're not trying to make money here. This is not a money making thing for us.
Yeah.
Really, it's about getting the message out.
It is, and when it comes to the funds that we make, we're going to dump it right back into the podcast. So, I
Absolutely, yep.
mean, we're talking about, like, maybe you thought about a new microphone or something like that, or like a better webcam or something
Sure.
like that. We're trying to make the production better, and it's just easier when we're able to do it off of funds that we generate with merchandise than it is trying to come out of our own pockets. So,
Yeah, I mean, we're actually trying to do the opposite of what the school is. I mean, we could put out a levy. If you guys want to hear more of us, then you got to find us on this channel where you pay $5 a month. But
hopefully we're actually creating value.
Well, I'm not sure. We do, we had Sarah and Joe on the podcast tonight, which we're thankful for. She ran into the podcast accidentally, probably just by seeing a post on Facebook. But that's another point that we'd like to make is that, you can really help us, even if you don't want one of these God is Judgmental t-shirts or a Pugnacious Pilgrim cup with our logo on it. That's fine. But one way that you really, really, really can support us is by, if this is a podcast that you enjoy or one that you see value in, please share it. Share it on Facebook, share it on your social media. We've had a lot of people that have shared it word of mouth, and because of that, we've had a lot of people engage with us and let us know, how much they appreciate and, look forward to hearing our episodes each week. So that's a blessing to us, and one way that's pretty simple to share about the podcast.
For sure, and we want to create an environment where we can have dissenting opinions. I know that we don't have a lot of dissenting opinions on the show. Some of that has actually been a function of inviting people that don't feel like they want to do that live. But we do want everybody to know that, like, we're game. If we say something that you take exception to, feel free to reach out to us via email or something like that. It'll create more content for us, which we're happy about.
Yeah.
But also, we want there to be a conversation. This is, there are certainly principles and morals that, like, we're not going to budge on, right? Because we're trying to rightly interpret the Word of God. but that doesn't mean that there's no discussion that can be had about those things.
Exactly.
So-
and even, tonight we're thankful that Sarah weighed in, not only telling us about the Shakopee levy, that it passed, but she also came back and said that the only way public schools will change is if the money follows the kids. And I believe what she means by that, I'm not going to speak for her, but is that really right now, like even for us, right, we're a homeschool family.
Mhm.
And, when we called Prior Lake to let them know, hey, our kids are going to be homeschooled, there was no pushback really, but what they wanted to make sure is that they still got credit, because our tax money still goes to the public school district here in town. It doesn't come to us. And so
Right.
if the money follows the kids, then wherever the kids go, that's where they're going to get the education that the parents want. But right now, there's no real incentive for public schools to stop doing what they are, because they
Right.
get the money anyway.
Wasn't that kind of the idea when Trump appointed his Secretary of Education?
Yes.
What is her name?
DeVos,
Yeah,
I think.
Betsy DeVos.
Yeah.
And she wanted more vouchers. She wanted more,
Right.
Things like that. And I don't understand how that would be a bad thing.
Well, I mean,
But it was
first of all, I
certainly
don't think it
twisted
is a
that
bad
way.
thing. I
Yeah.
mean, it's made a bad thing because really public schools are, they're funded by taxpayer money, and there's
Yeah.
huge lobbies, as you can tell, right? Like we talked about that not that long ago, really where the FBI was coming in and chasing down all the mama bears because they were showing up to school board meetings. But what
What a dumb thing.
Why that was problematic is they were really petitioned by the teachers union, and were in cahoots with the White House to develop this this response from the FBI to try and scare these moms from showing up to protect their kids. And it's just silliness, right?
Yeah, I saw a pretty telling meme on the internet, right? We're all about satire here. We're all about calling out absurdity. And actually it was kind of a comic, and the first slide was a mother standing in front of the school board saying hey, can you guys please take away the gay pornography from the libraries and take away all of this guilt tripping for skin color. And then it pans over to the judge, and they're like, the best we can do is labeling you a domestic terrorist. But that's kind of what it's come to.
Really, I mean, yeah, and of course, I mean, we've seen some angry moms, but to the point, even when we had our buddy Zach on the show, right? You should be angry. A lot of this stuff should make you absolutely angry,
Even if you don't have kids.
Yeah, his kid is not even in school yet, but he's angry, and he's angry because children are our treasure, right?
Yeah.
I mean, God has given them to us, and we are called as parents to raise them up and train them up in the way that they should go, so that when they grow, that the truth will not depart from them. And the reality is, if you're not playing offense right now with your kids, especially if they're in the public school system, you're behind the eight ball, right? You can't really, I don't think you can win the heart of a kid if you're just trying to play defense all the time, because you don't have the same amount of time.
Yep. So another shout out really quick to Eric Kahn and the Hard Men podcast. Just came out with an episode that's all about how Christians should think about relocating. And one of the points that they made on this recent podcast was about how you have a duty as a Christian parent to protect your child from having these types of influences. And a lot of Christians kind of take the route of I'll just deal with it as it comes. It's well, if you just deal with it as it comes, you have to understand your kids are going to be combative. They're going to want to rebel because they have all of these other people that they're looking to for direction in their lives as a function of sending them to the public school in the very first place. Now, I'm not trying to shame anybody for sending their kids to public school. We've all got a different story, right? But really the point that they're trying to make is we have to be the ones that are in control of the narrative that is being fed to our children. And if we're not the ones in control, we're constantly going to be playing the game of trying to change their mind.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to have to be playing defense instead of offense.
Yep.
And that's not a good place to be as a parent, in my opinion. And I don't have kids, so you can throw away everything that I ever say about parenting if you want, but
Well, and the incumbent governor of Virginia, not that we're going to go back into this, but he was asked pretty much point blank, who bears the majority of the responsibility for kids? Is it parents, or is it, the community? And he refused to answer that, really. He believed that schools had just as much, if not more, responsibility for raising kids than parents, and that's
Yeah.
that's the reality. I'm not saying that's every teacher's mentality. I'm not saying that's every progressive, leader's mentality, but we understand what we're up against, right? And I think that's really part of the heartbeat that we want to get at today. I forgot to switch over, Mike. Am I making you uncomfortable?
A little
You're
bit.
like, like, dude, why am I?
I
the
knew
only
this
one
would
on the
happen,
camera?
man. I knew that once we changed the
Well,
camera
I'll
angles.
be honest. Like, here's the deal, right? Like, I am not the eye candy of this podcast.
Oh,
so
come on, Jason.
I'm going to exploit your beauty.
I know
as
I'm
much
wearing
as I
short
can.
sleeves, but come on. You're the eye candy of this
Well,
podcast.
I'm not. I'm really not. I'm the 41-year-old, and I didn't even mention we're on our 40th episode, Mike. This
Is that
our
right?
40th episode. So
Goodness gracious.
we're really plugging along. But before we get too far off track here, we want to talk about the lost art of listening, and really, what good would it do if we didn't turn to God's word to try and understand what God says about listening? And so there's plenty that God says about listening. Proverbs is full of little, just nuggets of truth where God talks about, really the heartbeat of humility comes from a listening ear, right?
Yeah.
And but we're going to actually turn to the book of James here, because James has a lot to say, kind of rebuking Christians specifically, and in this case, like, not that we need a rebuke, but I do think sometimes, it's very
I need a rebuke.
It's very easy to flow with the culture, right?
Yeah.
And unless you have a check and balance, like, one of the things that the Word of God is intended to do is to teach, equip, and rebuke and train us in righteousness, right? And the reason is that so that we would be equipped for every good work. And so James chapter 1, verse 19, this is hearing and doing the word is kind of the heading over this. But it says, "Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls." And I just think, like, man, there's so much truth in those 3 verses right there. First of all, we need to be quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to anger. When I was pitching this idea of the lost art of listening, one of the things that hit me is that there actually is a distinct difference in the word between hearing something and then being a listener. And I used the passage in from Hebrews chapter 4 where it talked about when God saved Israel, or saved the Israelites from enslavement and was walking them towards the promised land. There were those that knew God's word. There were those that knew the truth. There were those that heard what Moses was saying and the commandments of God that he was giving to his people, but they weren't unified with those who were listening. And it made a distinction that listening is not just being able to receive input in, but allowing that through discernment then to change how we choose to live our lives. And, I love here that James is saying, let every person be quick to hear and slow to speak and slow to become angry.
That's incredibly convicting for me. And the reason for that is I argue a lot with a lot of people. The people that are really close to me probably know that. And it's really taken a lot over the last, 15 years to really learn how to craft arguments based off of listening to what somebody's actually saying, rather than trying to tell them what I want them to hear. And I'm still horrible at it. So to everybody in my life that loves me, thank you for loving me and being patient. Every time I read that, I'm like, man, that's not me. And it so in that sense, I'm really glad that we're talking about this week, because it's something that I know that I can go into at least humbly because I am not good at this, man. So hopefully I can share my struggle with anybody listening.
Well, and Mike, you hang out with me enough and my family enough to know, even, recently we've kind of laughed about it a little bit. Not that it's funny, but it's just, it's like, hello. But, a lot of times, we're not paying attention to what other people are saying, right? We want to just jump into the conversation with whatever we have in our mind as if it's the most important thing in the room. And I've caught myself a few times interrupting my wife and enough to the point where we kind of laughed about it now, because it's like,
well,
man,
you and I laughed about it.
Yeah. Well, she did too. I mean, I think, when did you come over? Was it Monday or Tuesday?
Tuesday, yeah.
Where we had meatloaf and it happened. And you and I giggled and said, oh man, Mike and I were just talking about how I interrupt you. And then, what was funny is, like, in a matter of 5 minutes later, like, she was interrupting me, and I just think, like, that's pretty, I mean, that's social media, is it not? Like, I'm going to read the first 3 sentences of your paragraph. I don't really care about hearing you out. I just want to know how I can argue against the point that you're trying to make, because I know that you're wrong. I don't even know what you think. I don't know why you think it. I don't know anything about you, but I know you just made some statement that I don't believe in. And because of that, I'm going to ascribe some kind of, label on you, and then just, pound you into the dirt.
Yeah, lately for me, like, the arguments coming against me have just been people, like, immediately assuming I'm uneducated or like ignorant. And I'm just like, you know what? Like, that's not going to get a rise out of me. But, like, just so you know, just because we have both come to different conclusions doesn't mean that one of us is educated less than the other one. It doesn't mean that one of us is smarter than the other one. Like, come on. Why can't we just disagree and leave it at a disagreement? We can talk about the points. We can talk about the logic.
Right.
But don't start hurling insults that, like, you really don't know what I know, and I don't really know what you know. I don't know what you've consumed. You don't know what I've consumed. The only way we can learn this stuff is if we actually listen to what one another has to say about it. And sure, we can challenge one another and say, like, hey, where did you hear that? Where did that come from? But you have to have, like, an honest heart and open ear to hear what they have to say. You have to be curious. You have to be open to having your mind changed in order to have a productive conversation, and most people just aren't. Yeah, myself included. Man, I'm guilty of that.
Well, and we, again, that's one of the advantages maybe of social media. One of our listeners actually chimed in and said, I love to argue with people over the internet. It's fun beating adults in arguments. And to be honest, like, I get a kick out of internet arguments, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes I can find myself being a little bit trollish on
Well,
purpose.
Especially when you're the one giving yourself the trophy.
Yeah.
And you're like, I won.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like, we don't have, it's like at the end of the debate, you don't have to ask anybody. And most of the time, especially if it's happening on your wall, your friends are going to chime in and have your back, right? And you found yourself in that position this week, right? Maybe that was kind of a catalyst to us kind of diving into this topic, is that we really wanted to shift away from our COVID conversation, right? Because that seemed to be central to a lot of what we're doing, and it's understandable when we're in the midst of a global pandemic.
I'm sick of talking about it, dude.
I am too. And I think, I don't know that we're best served to keep talking about it, but the point I think that I was making is, on purpose, I'm kind of provocative and I guess maybe even passive aggressive. I don't really see it that way.
I don't think passive aggressive is the right word.
But a lot of times, like, when I'm sharing things on my page, it's done in a very intentional way. I'm not trying to put a lot of data behind it, because I don't want to be the guy that manipulates or tries to persuade people in how to think. But what I do want, and what I am very, very passionate about, is making sure that people aren't just drinking whatever they're being sold, by maybe the mainstream narratives, right? And so I'll share a lot of things that kind of come from, different sources that people otherwise probably didn't hear a lot about, and they're certainly not discussed a lot. But I don't give a lot of context to it, because I don't want to persuade people how to think. I just want people to think. Like, that's what I want. I want people to be critical thinkers who think for themselves.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who was sick and tired, I guess, of my method of engaging, and kind of just went off a bit on, how I go about my business, and how it's really, I mean, in his words, quote unquote, bullshit, really, is what he said.
Yeah, and I think it was more, from my perspective, I think it was more him just being frustrated that you don't agree with him. Because certainly there have been a lot of times, Jason, where you've posted stuff on your Facebook, and I'm like, why would Jason be posting this? Because it's like, it's against, like, you post stuff that is against your narrative a lot of the time, just as kind of like food for thought.
Yeah.
And I have to like remind myself like, oh, you're posting stuff just so people can become educated. You're not posting stuff so people will be like, oh, I agree with Jason. You're like, here's this article, read it, you know. But what he accused you of was essentially crafting this like completely one-sided narrative when your position, especially regarding COVID, has always been like, hey, do the research and make a decision for yourself. Don't let anybody bully you.
Right. Yeah.
That's been your.
I believe in freedom. Right?
Yeah, that's been your platform since like day one. And I chimed in to try and defend you. And I mean, you probably read the comments, but you know, it was basically like, you don't know me, step off. And I'm like, dude, you're interacting publicly, and I'm making a judgment call based on that.
What
like,
I see on
you know,
on a public forum.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm not going to feed you, troll, or something like that. And I'm like, whatever, dude.
Well,
I'm just like, I think it's wrong to immediately start just acting like a huge, I don't want to call him a jerk. I was gonna, but I don't want to. I certainly think he was being incredibly rude. I think that he was throwing out a lot of accusations that were not true. And I don't think it is logical to do those things, to use the language that he used and to jump to those conclusions while also pretending that he's got all the answers and he has the moral
high ground.
You can't do all of that at the same time.
Right. And I think, you know, what I've found, you know, really in some ways I try and bait those conversations. So I guess in a way it is a bit of a troll, right? And I don't know if that's the right language. I just don't know what else to say. But I really enjoy having those conversations, especially with people that are that, you know, quick to kind of jump to conclusions, because you know, if you can kind of slow them down, what you actually get to is the nuts and bolts of things. And it took time, right? You got to be engaged, and you have to be willing to try and press in and understand where people are coming from and help them understand where you come from. But that's what we need. Like, this world needs people who are willing to listen to others, even when we don't agree. And I think at the end of that, where I was able to feel good is that, you know, not that he was like, okay, well done. You know, that's what I want to see. 'Cause
that is what he said.
That is. But ultimately, what you have in that is all the other people who are engaged and seeing and kind of pressed in. Hopefully what they were able to see from me, this is my heart, this is my hope, is a guy who's willing to press in, even when I'm being called names, even when someone's making accusations about me that I don't think are true, to try and be kind in how I respond and really live into the heartbeat of what we see here in James 1, where it says, be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. I feel like we're so quick to become angry, and it's so easy on social media to do that. And really, you slam a gospel door when you do that as an ambassador of Jesus Christ. Yeah.
Well, Jason, I'm not trying to like pump you up too much, but
I need it. No, I'm just kidding.
To our listeners, if you want to see how to rightly, in my opinion, rightly handle being attacked for your beliefs on social media, follow some of Jason's threads. I mean, Jason, you've got to be like one of the just like most delicate yet convicting people on social media, and I know that you are that way intentionally. You listen well, you validate people. Like when people make arguments, you validate them in what they're saying, and you give them what they deserve to be given. Like if they say truths, you're like, you're absolutely right, you know? Like especially when they'd be like accusing Trump of like not being a good guy, you'd be like, I agree with that. Like, you know, like we can relate on that, because then they realize like, oh, I am actually talking to a reasonable human being. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to say that what we should do is try to find like middle ground with these people, because we should cling to our convictions, but we can cling to our convictions while also having a constructive conversation with somebody where we're actually trying to understand them. Because if you can understand the heart that somebody has behind pushing something like critical race theory, if you can understand their heart, you can actually start to pull them towards the truth and introduce them to the fact that we have sin in our lives, all of us. Right? But you're not going to get that far unless they trust that you care about what they have to say.
Yeah, and that's such a great point, right? Especially nowadays, like, when we talk about technology and how much time we're spending in front of the screen, I think a lot of people, it's well known that a lot of people are getting their news and information from social media. Now that doesn't mean that these mainstream media, they've obviously seen, like, look, it's not the traditional methods that people are getting news, and so they're trying to put stuff out there on these platforms as well. But really, to try and press in and engage takes a humility that a lot of people they don't have, and I don't have it. I mean, it's not natural to me, especially when someone's making accusations about me. It's not natural for me to say, let it go. Like, I'm looking for a fight. I'm looking for, I enjoy that just as much as JJ said he did, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's pretty cool to be able to walk away from an argument and feel good about yourself. But,
right.
But if that's all you get out of it, like, you've probably lost an opportunity to make an eternal difference, or at least try to make an eternal difference in someone's life.
And that's one thing, is like, on social media, there's a high likelihood that arguments are going to delve into something that's just, like, pretty disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have an opportunity that's unique to, like, nonverbal communication, where we can take time and think about what we're going to say. So I would encourage people, if you are interacting with people online or via text message or whatever, first of all, stop it. Have more in-person conversations. Second of all, if you are able to take time and think about it, it's a lot easier to do that with these nonverbal ways to communicate. It's weird when you're in a person-to-person conversation and you take 30 seconds to think about what you're going to say next. Not saying that's not appropriate, because sometimes it is, but at least if you are going to, and we've said this before on the podcast, if you're going to interact with somebody online that is coming against you, check your heart before you hit that enter button. Check it. We don't want to drive people away. As much as we think that we're, like, owning people, we're like, take that. And don't get me wrong, sometimes I think that is appropriate.
Yeah.
But we have to make sure that we are rightly representing Christ, like, first and foremost.
Yeah, and I think, at least for me personally, when I think about people engaging on these platforms, I think about how Christians can sanctify that, right? And not ourselves, right? It's the power of the Holy Spirit moving in us, and how much difference it actually makes, when we go about doing that. Now, I don't think we necessarily change people's convictions. People's convictions are deeply rooted into who they are a lot of times, right? And they come from a lot of different places for a lot of different reasons, right? And I've learned over the years that, people's animosity towards the church and towards Christianity, like, I always used to take it so personally, but then I'm like, wait a minute, like, I don't know why you're angry at God, but it certainly hopefully wasn't something that I said or did. And if it was, then I owe you an apology. But a lot of times it comes from past hurts or the ways that they've seen it done wrong, or the hypocrisy that they've seen. And all of those things rightly should be called out, right?
Yep.
And somehow we have to show a different way. Somehow we have to expose people that the gospel is actually good news. It really is good news. And people don't believe that it's good news. And I think a lot of times they don't believe it's good news is because the people that they know who proclaim Christ look absolutely nothing like them. They
that
look
fruit's
like
rotten.
Everybody else.
Yeah, the fruit's rotten, and they're like, I don't want to eat from that tree. Would you mind if I went into a quick anecdote?
I want you to do it.
So I think that our responsibility as Christians looks a lot like this. So we have a responsibility to listen to people who haven't accepted the gospel, because if we listen, then we know how to introduce the gospel to them. We know what their hang-ups are. We know what they are skeptical of. We know only if we listen, right? We can't assume anything. When we're developing relationships with new people, you got to stop. You got to shut your mouth unless you're asking a question. You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to get into, like, conversion coaching or anything like that. But so I had a friend once upon a time, and there's still a lot of love in my heart for this guy. so he is half white and half black. Big guy, right? I mean, most people would call him a big black guy, even though he is half white. And he would remind you of that, right? But when it came to racism, and I'm comparing, I know I'm conflating two things that like don't really make a lot of sense, but I'll bring it back around. He was the victim of racism, right? There were a lot of times where people treated him differently because of the color of his skin, because he was a big guy, you know. There was like, you know, the purse clutching, or like, you know, the, what do they call it, like clutching their pearls or something like that. But he took a different approach to it. He wanted to understand why somebody would react that way. And a lot of the times he would find out that somebody reacted that way because of a negative experience that they had earlier on in their lives with somebody who looked just like him. And he wasn't ignorant to that. He understood that, like, there's probably a good reason that somebody is reacting that way towards me. It has nothing to do with me, but I still have a responsibility not to jump to conclusions and to try and meet them halfway and maybe change their perception about somebody like me.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that a lot about him. And in the same way, we have that opportunity as Christians, because there are a lot of people out there who have been completely burned by the church, by church people, that weren't pointing back towards Christ and were acting in a very dogmatic way, and they were wrongly representing Christ.
Right. And I'm still that guy on
Me
far
too.
too many occasions.
Me too.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, look, Christ is beautiful. Christ is glorious. Christ is absolutely everything he says he is in the word and more, right? Like, he's the best thing that humanity has ever received. And if you have a bad impression of who he is, I want you to see Christ for who he is. I want you to be able to taste and see that the Lord is good. And there's only one way that you can do that. It's not going to be because I destroyed you on the internet and I didn't, you know, I totally just wrecked you, right? Like, that's not the way that you're going to see that Christ is good. You're going to see Christ is good by me taking the time to be like Christ in how I choose to engage, right? And so, what did Christ do? I mean, we've used this story before, but it's so beautiful. It's so pertinent. It still is so relevant to the world in which we live. What did he do when he met the woman at the well, right? He listened, you know, he asked questions, he engaged, he took the time to get to know her. He already knew things about her, right? He had the discernment and he knew things about her, but he still took the time. He didn't try and destroy her. If he wanted to, he could have. He could have called her out right from the beginning for her sin and her lifestyle, but instead he wanted to engage her heart. And the way that you're going to be able to engage somebody's heart is by listening to them. Every person has a story. Every person. You have a story, Mike. I have a story. Jason Ryder has a story. Sarah Copley has a story. Everybody has a story. And our stories are part of who we are. They're part of how we're wired. They're part of how we think. They're part of how we choose to live our lives. And they're part of our politics, right? They're part of our convictions. Mm-hmm. And it's important for us to take time to get to know one another so that we can, like you said, right, really, we had this conversation because we have a good buddy of ours who is just so exceptional at reading the room, right? Or, you know, as maybe scripture would call it, contextualizing, to be to the Jew a Jew, to be to the Gentile a Gentile, so that we can engage with the truth of the gospel and let the Holy Spirit do the work at that point. Mm-hmm. And far too many times, we allow our emotions, we allow our offenses, we allow our, you know, our preferences to get in the way of truly listening to other people so that we can engage with them on a level that would actually make a difference. And that's just sad to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Man, and there's no better way to encourage somebody either than by listening to their story and then helping them connect the dots, how what they are going through could help someone.
Yeah.
I've found that that's been a very encouraging strategy to a lot of people who are kind of falling, you know, like people who are kind of drifting. when you take the time to hear their story, and be genuine about it too,
Right.
you know,
Don't be patronizing.
like
for
that was one of
sure.
the hardest things for me as like an early Christian is it's like, well, how do I care about people? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I was so self-centered
Right.
that
Yeah.
I was like pretending to care like
That's
is really a
worse.
hard thing to do, and
Oh.
it comes across as like so ingenuine.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you have a hard time caring about people,
Pray for
let that be on your prayers.
Yeah, pray
you know,
for that for sure.
let the Lord shine light on that sin and repent from it. Because I know when I was convicted of that, the guilt was really, really heavy, and I'm still frequently convicted of that. It's like sometimes when people talk, I'm like, and then I'm like, oh man, like don't be that guy,
Yeah.
Mike. Like we've come so far.
Right. but I mean, I think just recognizing it, right? Then you, like you said, to your point, like we can pray against that, right? And if you find yourself
Yeah.
being so tied to certain things, like when you wake up, like, okay, internet, what are we offended about today, right?
Yeah.
Like if that is where you find yourself a lot, I would say take some time, take a sabbatical from that, and just really ask God to change your heart so that you can really use those platforms as a way to be a good steward of the gospel
Yeah.
of Jesus Christ and an ambassador for him. You know, I know for me personally, my story was full, and these are people that I loved and were you know, that I cared about a lot. But they would say, like, I look at Jason's Facebook posts and his social media, and it's nothing like who I know him to be, right? And my wife would come back to me because these people were, you know, they were telling Anna and not me, but they were basically sharing, like, what I see Jason posting, I know Jason's kind. I know Jason loves Jesus. I know Jason loves people, but what I see on Facebook looks nothing like that. And they were bringing that back to my wife, and she was sharing it with me in a way of accountability so that I could really sit there and say, like, who am I? You know, am I my online persona, or am I who I am with all my family and friends, right?
Yeah.
And that was convicting, like very, very convicting for me, because my efforts, if you were to ask me, oh, I just want people to know the Lord. Well, they don't want anything to do with
Right.
the Lord if that's how I'm choosing to be. And so even with things like God is judgmental, right? Like, what is our heart behind that, right? God is judgmental. We want people to know that because that is a biblical truth, right?
Mhm.
But if we show people God is judgmental by being judgmental ourselves and accusatory and you know, telling people they're going to go to hell without any kind of, you know, pointer towards the grace and mercy of Jesus Christ, we're not doing a favor for anybody.
Yeah.
You know?
I agree. We should be giving people an opportunity to repent and to see what repentance looks like. That should be our goal, really. And I do have to say, though, if somebody rejects the gospel message and rejects the opportunity to repent, I think that we are well within our responsibilities as Christians to walk away.
Yeah, I mean, dust the sand off your sandals and move along, right?
So in that sense, like, we are, as believers, called to get to that point where we can make a judgment call.
Yep.
At a certain point.
Right. And I think, again, like, even that decision, right, should be rooted in a place of love, right? Like,
Yep.
I love you enough to read the room, if you will,
Yeah.
and see that you want nothing to do with Jesus. I'm not going to throw my hands up in despair and say, you know, fine, go to hell. You know, like, I'm not going to say that, right? Like, my heart is still going to be broken. There was a not C.S. Lewis quote, but Charles Spurgeon quote, and I'm going to butcher it, but the premise was, if people are going to go to hell, at least let them do so with us clawing at them and making every plea and effort to keep them from it, right?
Yeah, it's the banner on my Facebook.
Is it? Well, read it, yeah, because I love, I mean, to me, that is the reality of what it means to love well.
Yeah, so it's, this is Charles Spurgeon. If sinners be damned, at least let them leap to hell over our bodies. If they will perish, let them perish with our arms about their knees. Let no one go there unwarned and unprayed for.
Right. And
that's so heavy metal, man.
But it's so countercultural too. I mean, and maybe that's what you mean by heavy metal, right? Is like that's not what the culture says. Like we're going to take the parting shot, right?
Yeah.
And probably as you're walking away, we're going to punch you in the back of the head too, just for good measure, right? But really what
Figuratively.
yeah, figuratively. but what Spurgeon is reminding us, especially as ambassadors for Jesus Christ, is that God is making his appeal to the world through us. So when we look at how we engage on the daily, when we look at how we press in and try and have conversations with people on social media or not, even face to face, like, is there evidence that we're really trying to lead people towards Jesus Christ and towards a renewed, restored relationship with God? And I don't know. I mean, I can't answer that. I can say that it is certainly an effort of mine, and so when I evaluate my life, those are the questions that I ask. Was that an eternally helpful conversation?
Right.
And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't.
Yeah. Well, no matter what, we always have to humble ourselves. You know, Paul gives us great examples
Yeah.
of how to humble yourself. If you are able to go into a conversation with somebody who's struggling with sin, and you first let them know your struggle with sin, it makes it a lot easier for them to relate with you, because they know that you're not coming at them as all high and mighty. That's one of the biggest criticisms I've listened to people.
Yeah.
I mean, this was one of my biggest criticisms of the
Sure.
church, right? And all it took was somebody listening to me, right?
Yeah.
The criticism is that too many Christians think that they're holier than thou because they have faith. It's like, oh, well, you think that you're special because you have Jesus. And it's like, well,
Not
I mean,
really.
the Holy Spirit did change my heart. That is a real thing that happened.
Yeah.
And because of that, I'm going to heaven. But it's not something that's like only for me. And it's not something I did out of my own effort. This is something that's available to you as well, you know? And he didn't do it because I'm a good guy.
Right.
Let me tell you that.
Yeah.
Like, so, yeah, again, just being able to, in order to be a good listener, you have to humble yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how you could be a good listener and not be humble,
I don't think,
which is
I
probably
don't
why
think
I'm
you
not a
can.
great listener.
Well, my wife would tell you, Mike, that I'm not a great listener, but I think she would hopefully also tell you that she's seen me grow in that arena. And so again, like we said this before, Mike and I aren't subject matter experts on this.
No.
The reason we're talking about the lost art of listening is because as we take, a pulse of the culture, we see that it's an area where the culture is just struggling, and an area where if Christians made an intentional effort to do things different, we could really shine. And I think we've had some enough feedback with even some of our listeners or those that engage with us on the internet that they're like, I disagree with almost everything you guys say, but it is a pleasure talking with you guys. And I think that that's pretty cool.
You get that more than I do.
You get it too, though, and you know specifically who I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
I do.
But
I do.
she's said it to both of us, and I've pled with her to jump on this show with us because I think that would be a pretty cool conversation.
It would be.
And I'm gonna keep pinging her, just to see if she will. But that's the kind of thing that we want, right?
Yeah.
Is that we've kept those lines of communication open with people that we disagree with on a lot of things, because the main thing is the main thing for us. And so, pilgrims, be different. Remember what James said, that we're called to be every person. He didn't say some people, those with the gift. He said, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And I think if we chose to do that intentionally and made efforts to strive in growth in those areas, we could be difference makers in this world. And that's what Jesus needs us to be. He needs us to be true difference makers. And it, especially in a world that's hopeless, to be able to offer hope through Jesus Christ is the best hope that the world can have. So thanks for joining us, pilgrims. We're blessed to have you guys on the show. We're thankful for those that chimed in, for those that joined us tonight. We're thankful for those that joined on the chat. That's even more of a reason for us to be thankful, because we don't get that all the time, and we love it when we do. So we appreciate you guys. We love you guys, and we look forward to meeting you back here next week. Mike, hopefully you'll have a deer by then.
Hopefully I will have a deer. Yep.
Well, Mike, give us a shout out, buddy.
What is it we usually say? Remember, pilgrims that there's a perishing world out there. So do your best to ensure that they're hearing the truth. God bless you, pilgrims, and stay pugnacious.
Stay pugnacious.